Thanks very much, Clive. That was wonderfully stimulating as we expected. We're now open to questions.
Hi, that was very interesting. Thanks, Clive. I'm Denise Fisher, I'm a former diplomat and who served, in fact, in KL. It's axiomatic that most of the last century, the leadership of Malaysia has been very personalised. Before you entered into your last point, I was going to ask you who is the new person around whom leadership is likely to coalesce for the future. And even after having heard your last point, I still would like to ask that question in the sense of for the newcomers. You talked about Obama at the beginning. The generations you've talked about, even Najib is still of the old school. Is there anybody in the new younger group that would be a likely contender?
There are enormously talented people. Some of them are with the opposition. Not all the people in the opposition are talented. There are even some talented and hopeful people on the government side. The tragedy is that the people of talent and ability are not offering themselves in politics. I mean, many of them are leaving the country or becoming writers or decided that postmodernist notions of media power are more important than barrels of guns or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I find it, since Frank Crean died yesterday, I find it very interesting to think that the sun also rises. You know, when Australia, that Kim Beazley didn't become leader, didn't become prime minister, that we have, the sun has risen in Singapore. We now have a situation in Malaysia where Najib, who is the son of the second prime minister, is going to be ruling, making in close concert with his cousin, Hishamuddin who is the son of the third Prime Minister, and they're making a devil's pact with Mukhriz, who is the son of Mahathir. I mean, the problem is that that it's not there aren't new and different people. The question is how the way in which this game is remains locked up in a way that in here, what can you say? Whether it's tall poppies or whatever, I don't know. That the dynastic principle does not work as successfully here as elsewhere, and that's my brief response to that, I suppose.
Wilson Ong, you seem to suggest in your last point that the best way forward is for someone like Najib to to take the middle ground approach, to be able to rally people, the right people around him, to build a support base. And I hear from your speech earlier that you seem to believe that the coalition that Anwar has come up with is a coalition of convenience, and it's not sustainable in the long run. Is that a fair comment, that you see that the future of Malaysia resides in the present coalition and not in any other coalition that might come up?
Fair enough. Look, if there is to be an opposition coalition, I think it's got to be a very different opposition coalition than the ramshackle thing we've done that's there now, because it's quite clear within that anyway that the Islamist Party are superb tacticians, and they've more or less, I saw some document they put out and say, let things go, that in the end we shall push things, in all those opposition states, each one has its own character. We shall push our Islamist line only so far as we can in each of them, without creating chaos, without creating concern, but we know what the long-term objective is, and the time will come when we can push. And in a sense, the article that I wrote in 1969 that took 30 I said then that the UMNO, that the Islamic Party's strategy was clear, that it would remain in the electoral game, not because it believed it could win elections, but it could use the elections to deprive the government of support, particularly Malay support. Now it has other ways, allies to that as well, in such a way to make the Islamic Party, what it stood for, irresistible to the UMNO itself, which means that the UMNO has only ever had the chance of standing for something else, of saying, yes, we are Muslims, but we are a different kind of Islamists. We believe in certain things about Malay culture, and this is a Malay Malay-centric, but not an exclusive Malay country. How do we work it through? That the UMNO has never had the will to draw the line. It's lost a 40-year policy auction on Islamic issues with the Islamic Party on on Malay issues with the Malay rights people, even after the Islamic Party stood aside from that. So I think that, first of all, that if the UMNO wants to do something different, it has to do something different. It can't play catch-up ball, as they say in the United States. Firstly. Secondly, is the UMNO has to try different, beyond which, if you're going to, no matter how much you manipulate the electoral system, you gerrymander, you go and use resources to make sure that your party and your side of the party wins the UMNO elections in these gerrymandered Malay electorates, it's very expensive. In the end, it doesn't work, and it creates an enormous counter-reaction. It's never enough. So my own view of it is, I wrote something on this for a book that came out. It was written by a number of people after the 1999 elections. I don't think it's. This is why I think it's. I know what I think needs to happen won't happen as usual. That for the UMNO to move to the middle, it would require a change in the electoral system. You'd have to move. It won't. You have to have government of all the people, by all the people, for all the people, in the name of all the people, and not just one part of them. That you can't win popular elections on any other basis. Now, to do that, in a sense, if you manage this, you get as many Malay majority electorates as you can. You make them much smaller than all the others. And you have a first past the post system. You're going to get a situation in which UMNO can always think it can win everything, but it remains vulnerable to always being outbid by Islamist and Malay extreme opposition. The only way you can do it is to move towards a kind of Australian preferential system, equalise the size of, move towards equalisation of size of electorates, have the Electoral Commission try and maximise rather than minimise the number of ethnically mixed electorates. And in that kind of situation, a party that wants to, can rule from the centre, because all parties will be required to say, how can I get 40% of the vote? But what I have to do, if I can get my 40% of the vote, what kind of concessions, what kind of cooperation, what kind of convergence with other parties and other points of view their own do I have to signal I'm prepared to make in order to get the next 10% to get over the line? A number of people in Malaysia want to move towards a proportional representation system, which I think you only have to look at France, Italy, when it had Italy and Israel, to know that these are not good. This is not a good look. That's my short or not so short answer to you.
You've talked, Clive, basically about the dynamics of Malay politics. Is there anything usefully that can happen on the non-Malay side of politics that would give us more reason for optimism than you've given us today?
I would say, regrettably and tragically, that certain things have happened on the non-Malay side of politics. I mean, I'm not talking about the opposite. Let me go back a bit to pick up something from the previous question going to this. That in outlining the answer that I did to Mr. Wrong, in a sense I'm saying that really I don't have great hope of the opposition. I think that the change might come by a kind of internal transformation within Barisan. First of all, the UMNO to unilaterally renounce Malay UMNO unilateralism, renegotiate, work in real partnership, have those move towards other changes, and move then slowly towards a situation where there will be a single unitary governing Barisan governing party, rather than be a coalition of ethnic communalist parties who get up and cry crocodile tears all the time about ethnic and communalism, about the very communalism and communal sentiments that they feed off and depend upon that keep them going. Well, who has taken that kind of position? The opposition, DAP, stands for that on paper, but in practice that's not what it amounts to. Tragically, within the government, the Gerakan party has taken that precise position. It is more or less called for, while the government said, we wanted to talk about Bangsa Malay, they said, well, look, they had a thing, we should all call ourselves, young people, we're all, they just came up, say, Anak Malaysia, I'm a child of Malaysia. They had these nice little caps made, and the UMNO sent the outgoing Prime Minister's son-in-law and the previous Prime Minister's son, in other words, Khairi Jamaluddin and Hishamuddin, to go and basically not only knock this on their head at the Grakhan Convention, but to abuse people for it. The Grakhan also came out and then flew the kite to say the time, a couple of years before the election, in response to all this Chris waving, say the time is perhaps coming. We should not only talk about us all being primarily first Malaysians, but for the governing party to show the way by ceasing to be a federation of communal ethnic parties and to become a unitary party. Again, beaten over the head, abused, and of all the Barisan non-Malay, non-UMNO partner parties, the one that did worst in the election was the Grakhan. The Grakhan was paid the heaviest price, took the biggest losses, but they were the ones who had taken that position. So in a sense, that's the way forward on the non-Malay side has already been signalled by the Grakhan that wants to be more ethnic, inclusive, multiracial. That's signalled this line of development from within the government to say, let's not do it overnight. Let's think of a gradualist. But as I always say that with all these parties, particularly the UMNO, that they say we must overcome communalism while they're feeding off it and feeding it and depending it. They say we must get over communalism. Always reminds me of St. Augustine. Give me chastity, but not just yet.
Thank you.
Sorry, am I talking too fast or getting too carried away or hysterical?
No.
I'll probably get arrested when I get back to Malaysia, but never mind.
Well, feeding on those last two comments, Daniel Grinberg speaking, on the issue of chastity and you getting arrested, can you...
Not for both.
Can you just explain to a bemused observer what the meaning of the sodomy charges that keep coming up are? And it's from a Western legal perspective, it seems so unusual because it has all the form of sort of 19th and 20th century British legal practice and yet it seems very peculiar.
Well, it's not usual. Look, I don't know. When the first Anwar thing came up, I said it struck me as being odd. I mean, we could see why Mahathir was doing it too. But normally, for kinds of sexual and moral indiscretions, if people are going to be, socially destroyed by being made subject to some kind of legal process, they're generally dragged up before the Islamic courts, the Sharia courts, if they're. But the Sharia courts wouldn't have countenanced, wouldn't have done this. Not only because a lot of them were friends of, I felt sorry for Anwar, but because by Sharia court evidence rules, there was no basis for conviction. Point one. Point two. Is it a Christian? Hate the sin, not the sinner. Look, there are parts of the Malay world that are legendary for being sexually libertine in earlier times, including, as Freud would say, polymorphous, perverse, any kind you like, including the Islamic heartland of Kelantan, which always lived in this fine state of tense balance between piety and hedonism. Since the Islamic Party's been around, they just, it's been a bird flying on one wing, one wing only, all piety and no hedonism, which is rather sad. But in my time, dare I say, in Kelantan, there was this place, somebody actually wrote about this finally in one of the Malay, in Kelantan, near the ruler's palace, there was this odd village you used to go into. You went in there, it was odd. It was a typical Malay village, no children, because they're all, transsexuals and transvestites, and people said, look, that's them, there was this, it didn't. Now, there's been a second accusation now, to which which when I was asked about it, I said, it makes me think of Oscar Wilde. They said, what do you mean? The love, the crime that dare not speak its name? I said, no, Lady Bracknell. To have lost one parent would seem a misfortune. To have lost both bespeaks a certain carelessness. And again, Anwar is a politician. I can, whatever the grounds of the first case, having been through all that, and nobody deserved to be treated, even a rabid dog didn't deserve to be treated the way Anwar was, but put all that aside. But having been put through all that, for the Prime Minister in waiting of Malaysia to put himself in the position where he could be rightly or wrongly exposed to that kind of an accusation is foolish in the extreme. And look, it's this kind of thing that, I forget which president in the United States was, but I looked at the other side. So I think I'd prefer to have Ronald Reagan's finger on the button and so. Well, but and this is it does not, for me, it does not speak to Anwar's morality or whatever. It doesn't speak to Malaysian legal. But it speaks to the question of Anwar's good sense, maturity, and judgment. And I cannot, for the life of me, understand how he could ever have put himself in that position. That is why I do not see, I raised my eyes for the mountains from whence cometh my salvation. I raised not my eyes to Anwar, because from Anwar does not come salvation, I don't think. I just don't, I am not alone in this,
You talked about the coalition, Anwar's coalition not having any future because of, the disparate interests. But what about the fact that UMNO is not seeking to reform itself in the way that even Abdullah Badawi tried by bringing in someone like Zayed Ibrahim as law minister? And of course, Zayed is an UMNO man who is now totally disillusioned and says openly that UMNO has lost the plot. So, and there were rumours that he was going to go over to Anwar's side. So with Najib up at the top and his cousins and, the dynasties, there are a lot of people in UMNO who are looking around saying, what is happening? We are totally losing credibility. So what do you think is the real prospect of people like Zayed Ibrahim saying, look, this is a party, a government that still thinks the NEP is needed, even though there are surveys that say it's not needed anymore. And there are lots of people out there who say that, I'm a fourth generation Chinese. Why are my kids still being discriminated? Haven't we moved on? So to cut all that short, don't you think there are a lot of people from UMNO saying the time has come, let's look over the other side?
Well, I think look, if the UMNO does not reform itself and does not reform the way it manages the BN, then the prospect is that, beginning with Gerakan and others, the followers, then the leaders, then the party infrastructure of the BN partner parties will break from the Barisan. The Barisan will end up being, Pride's Purge, will end up being UMNO. Will end up being UMNO in UMNO in somebody else's sarong, but it'll just be the UMNO body. In that context, then there's a possibility. Then certainly there are a lot of Malays who will be ready to move in that direction. I don't see that coming about. The thing is, I don't see the Anwar's coalition delivering salvation. I don't see the UMNO reforming itself, and I don't see that scenario coming about peacefully. I'm a serious pessimist on all these things. It's not just Anwar. It's not just Zayed Ibrahim. The other day, you mentioned Zayed Ibrahim. Tunku Razali said very soon, give you a third Kelantanese, Tunku Ahmadul Thayudin, former foreign affairs minister, former whatever he was in ASEAN, who is now he's the internal, what do you call it, ethics committee and disciplinary whatever inside the UMNO. And he said the UMNO is hopelessly corrupt beyond redemption, and it's lost the. You've got people in the UMNO that are taking that. Interesting, those three are from Kelantan. I think it tells you something that peculiar about Kelantanese Malay politics. Kelantanese have been fighting politics among other Malays because they haven't been worrying about non-Malays, and they've got no inhibitions about calling a spade, or whereas everywhere else everybody's got this thing. I hate that guy's guts, but I'm not going to say it publicly because we must maintain Malay unity, and that's part of. Look, I agree with you, Helen. I don't see I don't see the just because the other things aren't going to work doesn't mean to say this one will or has to. I think this is why the Najib succession is going to be crucial. So I can't really see how he's going to hold it all together. He may win, and he may even Mahathir may come in as number 2, but everybody else is going to. I think the vast number of people being elected to the party are in this election are really very, very hard line on all these issues. Are not going to give Najib much room to move, despite the fact that he'll have lots of resources. Najib also, without I really speak before, you couldn't speak about them because they were sub judice. Now there've been some funny legal decisions, and so you can't speak about them without being in contempt of court. But all the questions around Najib still remain, are not resolved, involving defence procurement contracts, rake-offs that he had or through his wife or through his we call factotum Razak Baginda, who has now been acquitted in this trial about the murder and blowing apart of the body of the Mongolian woman, who was not simply just a model or a floozy, but was together with her father part of serious negotiations of defence materials contracts with Russia. And that they would do this to dud whatever happened, to somebody have that done to them, at all, to be dudded out of $500,000 in Malay terms, it's just, given the money that's sloshing around there, is just inconceivable. And those issues, no matter what happened, and the disappearing private investigator with the 2 contradictory statutory, if anybody knows what I'm talking about, if not, don't worry about it. Like all these Malay things, more complicated. This book tells me more about crocodiles than I care to know, as the old book. You don't need, but those things are not going to go away, and for that reason, I think it's not a good outlook. That Tunku Razali was trying precisely to activate a different kind of trans-ethnic coalition at the same time as he was trying to make some movement in these elections in the UMNO. Who knows what was going on, but certainly there was a lot of actual potential groundswell support in the UMNO for Tunku Razali, but basically everybody in the party branch, in the party machinery, was sewn up and tied up, and no effective vote on any of these things could ever be had. So it's not a good outlook.
You've been wonderfully generous with your time and generous with your conclusions and judgments. I hope it's just been generous and not brave. As I said at the beginning, this is an issue which is important for Australia. One of Australia's longest established relationships in Southeast Asia, and what happens to Malaysia matters to all of us. And I thank you, Clive, for throwing such light on it today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.